Move on to our next speaker, Toby Cadman. Toby is the co-founder and head of Guernica 37 International Justice Chambers in London. He's the co-founder of G37 Law Office in Madrid and the co-founder of the Guernica Centre for International Justice, and also the executive director of the TMC Advisory Group. At the moment, Toby's firm is pursuing a case before the Spanish National Court on behalf of a Syrian Spanish national whose brother was abducted, tortured, and killed by the Syrian Security Forces. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Toby's an established international law specialist, so he looks at international criminal and humanitarian law, international terrorism, anti-corruption, maritime security, extradition and mutual legal assistance, and human rights law.
Toby's a very busy man.
I'm also Paul's lawyer, so.
And he also has a lot of expertise in international legal obligations, in the UN system of protection, and also pursuing complaints before the UN Special Procedures Branch. So talk to us a little bit about all these very many busy titles.
Thanks very much, and as I said, I am also Paul's lawyer, so I had to listen very carefully what he said, so as not to jump in and correct him. Thanks to, perfect. Thanks to Karen for organising this. I think it's an honour to be on the panel after hearing from Hytham a very passionate story, and it reminds me of many of the stories that I've heard where Hytham undermines how severe the treatment was that he went through, and that's something that I've encountered frequently, that many Syrian victims feel as though what's happened to them is not as bad as what's happened to some others, and I think you should be applauded for taking such a strong position and such a modest position, because what people like Hytham have been through is truly extraordinary, and it guides his passion now, which I think is remarkable. I've been involved with Syrian issues for almost as long as the revolution. I got involved, and I still carry the banner. So I'm not independent and I'm not impartial. I have a I have very strong feelings. I do believe that there can be no political solution without justice and accountability being at the centre of it. I don't believe that it can be without full consideration of victims, as Anne has said, and it needs to be a Syrian-driven process. We're very good in the international community in dictating and showing how it should be done without real consideration of the people that it's going to affect. And I think that's something that really does need to be taken into account. And certainly, I've just come back from Geneva, where I spoke to the Office of the High Commissioner about the new UN mechanism that has been established, which I think is, as I will speak about, I think it is a positive step. But I think it needs to be done right, because we do have a lot of experience in doing things badly, unfortunately. Sorry, Syria is trying to answer me. They're just turning my phone off.
Has it got the answer?
No, it hasn't got the answer, unfortunately. Because they didn't understand the question. My background, I'm primarily a prosecutor. I'm a barrister, but I primarily prosecute. My practice is based on a victim-driven approach, which is probably why I prosecute far more than I defend. I spent 10 years in Bosnia. I was the head of the War Crimes Support Unit to the Bosnian Prosecutor's Office and helped build a national war crimes court. There are many reasons for why I went to Bosnia. Most importantly, as most people know, behind every strong man is a stronger and greater woman. And my wife was Bosnian, so she dragged me there. So I went there for a 3-month Foreign Office secondment to help on human rights cases, war crimes cases, and ended up spending 10 years there. I then returned to practice in this country, got involved with a number of different conflicts, and then was approached by a group of Syrians that were trying to pursue a civil case against the Syrian government in Washington, D.C. As a result of that, I was invited to speak at a number of conferences in Turkey, and the turning point for me, I attended a conference in Istanbul which was organised by 2 international organisations. And I was so ashamed sitting at the table that there were no Syrians around the table, and that a number of international experts were dictating how this process was going to fold out. And this was very early on. This was probably in the summer of 2011. And I had a very good friend Syrian, who was working on the Syrian border in Antakya at the time. And I asked her, could you get a couple of judges, defected judges, that I could come speak to? And so I flew down to Antakya, walked into the room. To my surprise, there was 150 of them there. And they were judges, lawyers, prosecutors, police officers. And I had a long discussion with them about how to investigate, how to document, and how to build up institutions. Because the one thing that we have to remember is that it is Syrians that are going to have the burden of dealing with all of these cases. It is not the ICC, it is not an international tribunal. And I say that from experience of Bosnia, where you had the Yugoslav tribunal. But when I entered the prosecutor's office in Bosnia in 2004, I was presented, or 2003, I was presented with a list of 10,000 cases that we had to prosecute, that the ICTY had not been able to do. We calculated, according to our own resources, that it would take us 234 years to prosecute all of those cases. And one of the hardest roles I had was going to victims' families to say, I'm sorry, but your case won't be dealt with, because we don't have the resources. So you have to understand that it is, in a future democratic Syria, it is Syrians that are going to have to deal with a lot of these cases. And so part of what I do is to try and develop the national capacity, because that's what's required. We also have to take into account, as one of the questions which is asked at every single discussion on Syria, is why is the ICC not dealing with this? And it's very simple. It has no jurisdiction. That upsets a lot of people, that offends a lot of people, because what's the point in having a global court to deal with war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide, when it has no jurisdiction to deal with the conflicts that it was set up to deal with? One, it's very easy for Syria to not ratify the Rome Statute and not fall within the jurisdiction. And of course they have their friends in Russia and China that will continue to veto any UN resolution that deals with accountability. And just 2 weeks ago, Russia again vetoed a resolution following an independent assessment that they pushed for on chemical weapon attacks. And they again vetoed it. Their role in the conflict is primarily the reason for why they have to veto this, because they could be put under investigation as well. They recently withdrew from the Rome Statute, something that they never actually joined in the first place. I remember I was asked by Russia today to comment on that, and I said, well, it's a bit like refusing to go to a party that you weren't actually invited to, because that is the reality. And they are complicit, directly and indirectly, in many of the things that we've heard from Paul, particularly the attacks on the hospitals, that are war crimes. There is no two ways about it. They are war crimes. The regime, and I will not call it a government, I will call it a regime, because it is a dictatorial regime that is targeting non-combatants, civilians, doctors, hospitals, children, elderly, characterizing them all as terrorists. That is always the response. They will use the answer, use their logic that these places are being used for terrorist activities. Now, in Paul's case, when they bombarded the facility, the building where he was stationed at that time, there was a media station. There is a document that shows an order was given to bomb that because it was being used by terrorists. There is another document that shows it was bombed because it's been used by Western journalists. That document demonstrates that that is a war crime. The other question which is frequently asked is, why is this not genocide? And it is genocide in some respects. But the problem is we often think of genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes on a sliding scale of severity, which is not. They are different in their scope, and they are different in their legal definition. But crimes against humanity is no less significant than genocide. War crimes is not less significant than genocide. And the reason why the vast majority of crimes are war crimes and crimes against humanity and not genocide in Syria is because there is not a single ethnic group, a single identifiable group under the Genocide Convention that is being targeted. It is all opposition to the regime. Now, what the Islamic State is doing against the Yazidis, that clearly is genocide. And it's very easy to establish that as genocide. But we shouldn't say to ourselves that as it's not genocide in Syria largely, that it is less significant and it requires a less significant response, because that's absolutely ludicrous. There are war crimes and crimes against humanity being committed on a daily basis. 500,000 people have been killed. 11 million people, which is half the pre-war population of Syria, have been forced to leave their homes or have been killed. And we've heard some of these horrific accounts today. Well, what do you do about it? I mean, there has to be something we can do. We can't just sit back and do nothing. We can't wait until the conflict ends. So our group has been working with a number of other groups. We work very, very closely with a number of different Syrian groups. We work with lawyers, doctors, because in many cases it's doctors that are documenting the cases inside Syria, in particular areas, particularly what we've seen over the last few months in Aleppo. Most of this was documented by doctors. And they come to us and say, look, we have no idea how to do this properly, and we're really afraid that what we're doing will not be used in criminal proceedings because we're not doing it properly. And so one aspect of what we have to do is to train them and prepare them for doing this properly, doing this in a way where the record can be maintained, because that's the most important thing. We may not have Bashar in a court tomorrow, but we will have him in a court one day. And what we don't want to do is to be starting investigations from the ground when that time comes. So that role is very, very important. And one of the things that I stressed to you in this week is they should not underestimate the significance of that part of their new mandate. They have to use Syrians and they have to train Syrians. The other aspect is there is no international jurisdiction, so we have to look towards national jurisdiction. And this was what drew us to our case in Spain. So some of you may have heard, and I'll just carry on talking until you tell me to shut up. Some of you may have heard about an individual called Caesar. Caesar is a very significant individual. Caesar worked for the regime. He was a military photographer in the Ministry of Defense. His job was to photograph on a daily basis, and before the conflict, he was a crime scene photographer. So if there was a death, he would be sent to photograph it. That was his job. But then there came a time when he was required to start photographing bodies in huge numbers. Because all of these thousands of individuals who had been arrested and taken to these prisons under military intelligence, and I'll get on to a bit of the hierarchy as to how this operates. But his job was to go and photograph these bodies so that it was documented. And they had numbers on bits of paper on their heads which showed the date that they were arrested, the facility that they were being held, and their death number. And there are several thousand. this does not factor in the 13,000 that Amnesty had documented, as we heard earlier. This is an additional number of between 5 and 11,000 people who were tortured and executed in these secret prisons. And the photographs are horrific. Now, I've dealt with, as I said, the conflict in Bosnia, I've dealt with Rwanda, I've dealt with the conflict in Bangladesh from 40 odd years ago. I have never seen anything like this. And I consider myself to be a relatively strong prosecutor who can detach himself from the reality of this. When you look at these photographs, it is impossible. There are children, there are elderly, there are eyes gouged out, there are burn marks from electrocution, from chemicals that they've used. There's froth coming from the mouth to show how brutal the torture was, and some of the bodies are so contorted that you can see the pain and suffering on their bodies when they died. And this man's job was to photograph this so that a pathologist could go before a judge and they could document this as somebody who died of natural causes and then get rid of the body. And that's what he did until he could take it no more. And he escaped. But he escaped with all of the images. So he smuggled out 55,000 images. He had to fake his own death so they wouldn't come after him or his family. And he came out, and very bravely, he decided that he wanted to contribute to an accountability mechanism. And he agreed to work with us. And he's spoken in public, undercover. Nobody knows his real name. Nobody knows his real identity. But he agreed to work with us, ensuring that these cases were properly documented and end up in front of the court of law. He went to US Congress and he spoke about this, thinking that this is the moment where the conflict changes. My responsibility is so great that I'm going to talk about this, and the US and the West is going to change their position and they're going to stop the conflict. And nothing happened. I advised against him doing that because I'm a lawyer, not a politician, and I want to see him give evidence in court, not in Parliament or Congress. And it impacted upon his well-being for a very long time. It affected him. But we've now got to a stage where we have this evidence, and we now have got to a stage where we've had a Spanish Syrian woman who has identified her brother in those horrible photographs. And her brother was brutally tortured. And she has agreed to act and to give a statement and to go before a Spanish court. And so on the 31st of January, we filed a case against 9 leading members of the Syrian military intelligence that are just one step below Bashar al-Assad. Now, we can't bring Bashar before a Spanish court, but we can bring the other 9. We're now waiting for the judge to rule on admissibility, and we're very confident that the judge will rule in our favour. And the Spanish legal system is very suitable for these types of cases because we act as civil parties in the proceedings. And these individuals will be tried under state terrorism laws. It's effectively crimes against humanity, but under Spanish law it comes under state terrorism. Now, there have been critics that have said dealing with these cases are raising a false sense of hope, and the expectations are too high, and you're going to destroy the Syrian community once again with nothing being done. And I disagree entirely, because this has raised hope amongst Syrian victims. I was in Berlin 2 weeks ago, where another case has been filed in Germany based on the Caesar evidence. We're now working with the Metropolitan Police here for cases to be investigated here. We have one British victim, some of you may have heard, Dr. Alice Khan, who went to Syria to help out. And he was immediately arrested, tortured, and killed. He was due to be released, his mother pleaded for him to be released, and they hung him in his cell, pumped him full of drugs so that he wouldn't struggle, so they could make it look like suicide. But the coroner's court here ruled that it was an unlawful killing. And so there is an obligation on the British authorities to investigate that. But they don't have unlimited resources. So our group has been running around Europe, Turkey, various different European countries, getting witnesses who were detained with him. People who can show that right up until that moment, he was in this one facility, and we know who was the commander of that facility, and we can prosecute that. Now, the question will always be, how are you going to get these defendants before a court? And that is, of course, the biggest challenge. And many people criticise how relations with the Syrian regime now is changing. And there are even talks about Assad being part of a political solution and saying how awful that is. Yes, it is awful. But there is an upside to that. That means these individuals will start to travel around freely and they can actually be arrested. They will start to have a sense of confidence that they can move in and out of Syria. And that's when we will be able to get them. We just need to be patient. We need to build very, very strong cases. I won't say watertight cases because it doesn't exist. But in the words of the former US ambassador for war crimes, Stephen Rack, who we work very closely with, the evidence that we have is on a scale of Euro. There is a paper trail, a very clear paper trail. And the one thing that we've learned about the Syrian regime is they are, I won't use the words I normally use in an audience like this, but they document absolutely everything. They are bureaucratic. All of these orders filter from the top to the bottom. And one of the groups that we've worked with has smuggled out 700,000 documents from Syria. Some of these documents say we need to deal with the problem because our refrigerators are full of decomposing bodies. There are documents that show that there are orders given to arrest key individuals. So all of this forms part of a case, and it will form part of a case. What I would say is, from what I've seen, this is not a handful of renegade military officers that are brutal torturers. This is a state policy to target anyone that impacts upon Assad's rule. The lady in the audience asked the question earlier, why is Assad, why is he not the great hope we all thought he was going to be? Because he has so much to lose. And his regime has so much to lose. And that's what they feared when the peaceful demonstration started. And that's why they had to break it down with this level of brutality that we have not seen for more than half a century. And I can see that I've probably not got very much time. And that's why, when you look at the industrialized torture, the mass starvation, the one picture that you will have in your memory when you look at these photographs is the Holocaust. That it is that level of brutality, and it is that level of organization. You remove Assad, you don't remove the problem. When the allegations against him were first made, and he always comes up with some flippant remark for him not being involved, he made this comment that I may be the president of the country, but I'm not in control of everything. I don't control all of the armed forces. I don't control everything that goes on in this country. His government issued a statement the very next day saying Bashar al-Assad is the president of Syria. He is control of every state and constitutional organ in Syria, almost like you're not getting away that easily. So there is this apparatus, this regime that controls absolutely everything, and they do not want to lose it. And they will protect it by any means possible. It is very Soviet in the way it operates. It is highly bureaucratic, and the one thing that we have learned is that this is a very well organized and orchestrated state campaign against any form of uprising, and they crush it with the utmost brutality. And that's why They must all be held to account, because Syria will never move forward. There will never be peace and stability in Syria unless you put justice and accountability at the very core. Thank you.